My stepmother's smile was a lie, and I say that as someone who once believed it could light up a room. My name's Elena Cross. I'm 34 years old, born and raised just outside Seattle, Washington. I'm the founder and CEO of a mid-sized tech company called Arcadia Systems. We specialized in enterprise cloud automation nerdy. I know. But that little engine grew from a garage project in my 20s into a $90 million firm. No outside investors, no family help, just sweat, ramen, and the kind of blind ambition that turns caffeine into equity. I didn't grow up poor, but I didn't grow up seen either. My father remarried when I was 16. 2 years after Mom died. Her name was Celeste, my stepmother. I mean, elegant, sharp, with that unflappable way of speaking, like she was always in control of the room and knew something you didn't. You'd almost respect it if it weren't so calculated. She came with a son, Mason. He was 12 at the time, all oversized hoodies and quiet eyes. Back then, he barely said 3 words at dinner, and I barely noticed him. He was just my stepbrother, a polite shadow in the hallway. I moved out for college soon after and didn't think twice about him. I built my company from scratch. No silver spoon, no seed money from daddy, just me, some stubborn code, and a belief that I didn't need to be someone's favorite daughter to be someone worth knowing. But then Celeste started showing up at my company's events. At first, it seemed harmless. She'd smile, shake hands, introduce me to some people she knew in investment circles, old family friends. She'd say, with that buttery voice, I thought maybe she was just proud. Maybe she was trying to connect. One afternoon, she invited me to lunch at a rooftop spot downtown. Rainy as hell. But Seattle charm, you know. I remember the glass of white wine she ordered for me before I even sat down. Elena, she said, dabbing her lips with a cloth napkin, you have built something extraordinary. But leadership isn't just about vision. It's about succession. Succession. That word felt strange, like someone handing you your own obituary. She went on to talk about legacy, long-term planning, contingencies, and then she said it. You should consider grooming someone to eventually take the reins. Someone young, moldable, trustworthy. I tilted my head. Like who? And that was when she smiled. That slow, gentle smile that had once made my father forget he was a widower. Mason, she said. I laughed. Out loud. I thought it was a joke. Mason was 28, working some mid-level logistics job at a warehouse on the east side. No business experience, no tech background, no connection to Arcadia. But Celeste wasn't joking. She was calmly, steadily planting a seed, one that would grow into the most audacious betrayal I'd ever face. Over the next few months, Mason started visiting the office, first as a curious observer, then as an operations intern, and somehow, without ever applying, as an executive trainee. I didn't object at first. Honestly, I thought it'd fizzle out, that he'd get bored. But he didn't. He watched everything. He asked questions, good ones. He started shadowing department heads, and he got liked. Not loved. Not yet. But liked, and when you're the boss, you don't always notice how fast liked becomes trusted. I was too busy managing the real crises market shifts, security audits, product pivots. I didn't see how subtly the foundation was shifting under me. At home, Celeste would drop little comments at family dinners. Mason really impressed your CFO last week. Or he has such a natural instinct for leadership, and always with a glass of wine in hand. As if her praise was just casual observation and not psychological warfare. My father stayed quiet. Always did. That was his default mode, neutral and absent. He'd nod along with Celeste's visions like a man who surrendered the wheel years ago. I told myself it didn't matter. I was still the CEO, the founder, the one whose name was on every legal document, every patent filing, every hiring record. But here's the thing about power if you don't defend it. People start thinking it's negotiable. That year, I received an anonymous tip through an internal security channel. A harmless-looking email that just read, check who's been accessing your private drive at 2 a.m. It took me 15 minutes to confirm it. Mason's access ID, logged in after hours. Downloading strategic memos, board minutes, unreleased product specs. I confronted him the next morning. Mason, you have 10 seconds to explain why you accessed my files. He didn't flinch. I'm learning, he said simply. Celeste said I needed to understand how things run. I froze. Celeste said, he shrugged. She's been mentoring me. She said you were okay with it. She said I was okay with it. Like I'd endorsed my own ousting. That was the moment the smile shattered. Celeste didn't want Mason to support me. She wanted him to replace me. And I realized something else that made my stomach turn. She didn't come to me asking for Mason's future. She came to me expecting it. Because in her mind, I was just the warm-up act, a placeholder until her real son was ready to take center stage. I smiled then cold and quiet and simply said, "Tell your mother she just made a mistake." And I meant it. Tell your mother she just made a mistake. Those were the last words I said to Mason before I walked straight into my office, locked the door, and sat in silence. You'd think I would have screamed or thrown something, but when betrayal's that deep, it's quiet. Like your lungs forget how to work. Like the whole room is waiting for you to catch up to reality. I pulled up the access logs again. Not just Mason's login, Celeste's too. Somehow, she'd wormed her way into admin-level access. How? I didn't know yet. But I knew one thing. She'd been planning this longer than I'd realized. I was being groomed for failure. By my own family. And the worst part, I had helped them do it. I had let Mason in, smiled at his questions. Let Celeste sit in meetings like she was some well-meaning auntie just curious about the business. I thought it was harmless. But it wasn't harmless. It was war. Let me rewind a bit. Though, so you understand how deep the rot went. Growing up, I was always second best. At least that's what my parents made me feel. My sister, Miranda, the golden child. Music scholarships, Ivy League dreams, prom queen vibes. I was the quiet one. The late bloomer. The girl who built websites for fun and fixed her friends' phones on the side. Whenever I did something good, my mom would say, "That's great. Honey, but Miranda already did that last year." When Miranda dropped out of college and moved across the country to find herself, my parents didn't flinch. They called it a brave choice. When I landed my first tech job at 22, my dad said, "Well, that's nice, but it's not exactly Stanford Law." So no, I didn't grow up with applause. I grew up with suggestions. Suggestions that I should smile more, that I should be more presentable, that I should think about marrying someone stable before I got too focused on work. And when Miranda vanished into her own mess, I thought for a second that maybe they'd finally look at me and see me. But no, they just replaced her pedestal with Celeste's. Celeste, with her lacquered nails and softly judgmental tone, who never raised her voice, never said anything cruel. She didn't have to. Every compliment came with a silent footnote. "You should be more like me." So when she started mentoring Mason and feeding him company strategy like bedtime stories, I shouldn't have been surprised. But I was so stupidly surprised. The betrayal hit different when it came from someone who pretended to believe in you. That week, I started watching everything who Mason talked to in the halls, who lingered in his orbit, who forwarded emails too easily. I ran quiet audits, had legal double-check access logs. I began noticing subtle shifts in team behavior, small things. A manager who used to come to me with concerns now looped in Mason instead. A board member who'd always been on my side suddenly became too busy to return calls. And my father, he just smiled in that distant, glassy way when I brought it up over dinner. "You always think people are out to get you," he said, buttering a roll. I laughed. Too loud. "No, Dad. I just learned not to ignore it when they sharpen knives at the table." He didn't even flinch. Celeste sat there, calm as ever, sipping her wine and pretending the world was just as it should be. That night, I stared at my bathroom mirror and realized they all thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought I'd hand over my legacy like a tired old coat and thank them for guiding the next generation. And the scary part, I almost did. For years, I craved approval like oxygen, but not anymore. So I made a list: names, departments, weak points, allies, and one by one, I started shoring up my defenses. I promoted my most loyal exec quietly, giving her financial control without board notification, still legal under our charter, but invisible to casual observers. I moved product timelines up by 2 weeks and leaked fake feature specs to test for leaks. I called in an external audit, pretending it was for compliance, but really, I needed to know if anyone on the inside had taken bribes. And I confronted my father, in his study, The one with the dusty shelves and the smell of old bourbon. Dad, I need to ask you something. He looked up slowly. What is it? Do you know what Celeste is doing? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for a photo on his desk. A picture of me at 19, at my first hackathon. Hair a mess, face glowing, trophy in hand. She said you'd be okay with it, he said softly. I stood still. She said what? She said you'd want to slow down eventually. That it was time for you to think about your future. That maybe Mason could carry the torch. I shook my head in disbelief. And you believed her. He didn't meet my eyes. You always seemed so tired. Elena, so busy. I just thought maybe it was time. That was the moment I stopped being angry. I just felt empty. They didn't see me as a leader. They saw me as a placeholder. And placeholders don't get legacies. They get replaced. The next morning, I walked into the office like nothing had happened, smiled at Mason, sat through the staff meeting, nodded at Celeste as she dropped by for her usual coffee with the CEO. But I wasn't playing nice anymore. The gloves were off. The war had begun, and I wasn't going to lose quietly. The war had begun, and I wasn't going to lose quietly. For the next few weeks, I played the role of a benevolent CEO. I smiled during meetings, praised Mason's input publicly, and even let Celeste pitch in on our next Leadership Vision Summit. On the surface, I looked like a woman comfortable with change. But underneath, I was building a war chest. I started by changing the rules of the game subtly, legally. I revised our executive review metrics, made them data-driven and ruthlessly specific. No more handshakes and good vibes as promotion currency. If Mason wanted power, he'd have to earn it in a jungle of KPIs and performance dashboards. He tried hard. He showed up early, stayed late, met with department heads, and even hosted a team-building paintball day which, to be fair, was weirdly popular. Some of the developers came back with bruises and actual respect for him. I'll admit it. He was better than I expected. Charming, smart, strategic. If I weren't the one he was aiming to dethrone, I might have actually liked him. But what he didn't realize was that I knew every move he was going to make before he made it. Why? Because Celeste taught me the same game, the same manipulation, the same grooming for leadership, the same chessboard logic. She just never expected I'd turn her own playbook against her. She thought she was raising a wolf in Mason. She forgot she raised one in me first. The funny thing is, we were evenly matched for a while. It was like corporate chess, with sharp smiles and espresso shots. He'd poach one of my junior VPs. I'd promote a scrappy outsider with loyalty and twice the brains. He'd hint about succession planning at board lunches. I'd quietly send financials to select board members showing our recent gains under my direct decisions. We danced, one step forward, two sideways, but there was one place I refused to lose. Product. Arcadia's soul was in its innovation. I wasn't about to let Mason's PowerPoint charisma mess with that. So I moved our R&D underground figuratively. Of course. I created a skunkworks team. Secret product dev. Off the books. Tight NDA. Just 6 people. All handpicked. We called it Project Echo, I told them. Build me something. Mason could never even imagine. Meanwhile, Celeste began to show cracks. She was used to control, to being 3 steps ahead. But suddenly, I wasn't reacting, I was preempting. Meetings she wasn't invited to, staff she couldn't read, rumors she couldn't trace. At a quarterly strategy session, she cornered me in the hallway. Elena, she said, tone sweet as syrup. You've been very independent lately. I smiled. Isn't that what a good CEO should be? She stepped closer, heels sharp against the tile. You're making a mistake. Mason is the future. You're wasting your energy fighting the inevitable. I met her gaze. Funny. That's what people said to Blockbuster. Her lips tightened. She didn't say another word, but I knew then she was nervous, which only made me hungrier. Still, Mason wasn't going down easy. He kept gaining ground. Some employees loved him, said he was a refreshing voice. He was better at the public image stuff than me, I'll admit. He started getting invites to speak at panels I used to headline. I was running out of time, so I lit a match. I leaked false product roadmaps, ones I knew Mason would see. They showed we were pivoting into AI integration. A buzzword buffet, but completely fake. He took the bait. He convinced Celeste to push for a surprise announcement at our next investors' town hall. I let it happen. The day of the town hall, I walked on stage after Mason's big pitch. He'd just told a room full of investors we were entering the AI space, complete with timelines, cost projections, and even a new logo. There was applause. Celeste beamed in the front row. I took the mic, smiled, and calmly said, "None of that is happening." Dead silence. I continued. "The real Arcadia project is currently under final testing, and no, it's not AI. Mason's presentation was an exploratory thought exercise, a case study on why not to chase buzzwords." There were gasps, a few chuckles, and then I unveiled Project Echo. It was bold, streamlined, groundbreaking, the result of a year of underground effort, a product that addressed actual market needs, not press release fodder. Investors lit up. Board members whispered, "Mason." He looked like someone had yanked the rug out from under him on live TV. Celeste stared at me like I'd just slapped her with a silk glove. That night, I got the first board call in months without her name attached. "Elena, we're impressed. Let's schedule a private strategy session." Mason didn't show up to the office the next day. Celeste did. Her smile was gone. She looked older, tighter, like she'd run out of tricks. "You embarrassed him," she said. "No," I replied. "He embarrassed himself." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You should have just stepped aside." I leaned in. "And you should have picked a better protege." And then I walked out. For the first time in a long time, I felt tall. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. Because Mason had one more move. And I never saw it coming. 3 days after the town hall, I received a message from our internal compliance team, urgent, confidential, flagged for CEO review only, subject line, irregularities in company financials, flagged transfers via executive access. I clicked it, half expecting a false alarm or some minor accounting glitch. But no, there it was. A series of quiet, unauthorized fund transfers routed through an older internal payment protocol, one we'd phased out over a year ago. Small amounts at first, then larger sums, redirected from discretionary marketing funds, innovation grants, and eventually, from our emergency operations budget, total damage, over $7 million. The access ID tied to the activity, mine, at least, it looked like mine. But I knew I hadn't touched that channel in months. Who had the means, the motive, and the access history to fake a trail like that? Mason. The golden boy had gone full scorched earth. It wasn't enough to outperform me in meetings or outcharm me at panels. He wanted to burn my credibility to the ground and sweep up the ashes. And this was a masterstroke. If the board saw this before I could explain, I'd be forced out in disgrace. No parachute, no legacy, just a broken crown. I locked my office door and called the only person I trusted with everything. Leah Harper, my head of compliance and the only person I'd once pulled from a sinking startup and handed her a lifeline. She owed me her career, and her loyalty hadn't cracked once. She picked up on the second ring. "Leah," I said, barely breathing, "I need you to pull full metadata on those transfers, all of them, and cross-check it with building access logs, device IDs, keystroke behavior, everything." Quietly. Silence. Then, "You think this was Mason? I think he's framing me," I whispered, "and I think he's about to sell me out." It took 48 hours. During that time, I acted normal, showed up, smiled in the halls, even gave a quick lunch and learn on leadership psychology, like I wasn't on the verge of collapse. Celeste never showed up. Mason did, but he didn't make eye contact, just strutted around like he was already wearing the crown. Then Leah called me at 11:17 p.m. "Got it," she said. "Tell me, he spoofed your access through a cloned session token, used a machine on the 12th floor maintenance level hardware, no camera access. But the keystroke patterns, they weren't yours. And there's fingerprint residue on the USB he used to inject the token. Can we match it?" "We already did." My heart thumped. "It's not Mason." I blinked. "What?" "It's Celeste." That's when the floor fell out from under me. All this time, I'd been focused on Mason, watching him, defending against him, assuming he was the mastermind. But it wasn't him. It was her. She used him as a distraction, a polished, likable smokescreen, while she did the real damage behind the curtain. And Mason, he had no idea. He wasn't just a pawn. He was the trap she set to keep my attention in the wrong direction. I sat there for a long moment, stunned. Then I laughed. Actually laughed. Of course it was her. Of course the elegant little speeches and perfectly timed guidance were more than maternal mentorship. Celeste didn't want to replace me with Mason. She wanted to destroy me through him. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. She really played the long game. But now, it was my turn. I had proof irrefutable, time-stamped, complete with physical evidence and a trail of deceit that screamed white-collar sabotage. Still, I wasn't going to just walk into the next board meeting and expose her. No, that would be too kind. Instead, I leaked a sanitized version of the breach to our private investor group, not naming names, not pointing fingers, just enough to stir concern unusual financial activity. Under investigation, pending legal review, Celeste got wind of it within hours. She came to the office the next morning, dressed in power navy with a pearl necklace. I swear she wore as a trophy. "You're panicking," she said as she walked in, cool as a shadow. "And that's dangerous, Elena." "I'm not panicking," I said, sipping my tea. "I'm positioning." She narrowed her eyes. "This company needs a stable image. If you drag this out, you'll tarnish everything you've built." I stood, slowly. "Oh, I'm not dragging anything out. In fact, I'm thinking of streamlining things." She laughed once, dry and tight. "You always thought you were clever." "No," I said, leaning in. "I knew I was clever. I just didn't realize how far you'd go to pretend you weren't." And then I slid a flash drive across the table. She stared at it. "That's your access trail," I said. "Your fingerprints. Your mistake. You tried to frame me with my own legacy." Her face didn't move, but her hand twitched. I could see the wheels turning damage control, denial, spin. But I was already ahead of her. "That flash drive. It's not the only copy," I said quietly. "In fact, the board has one. The DOJ might get another, or maybe not, depends on what you do next." Her lips parted, but no words came. And in that stillness, in that terrifying quiet between the beats of her ego cracking, I saw something rare, fear, real, unmistakable fear. Mason came in an hour later, saw her sitting in the conference room, pale and rigid. He looked at me. "What happened?" And for the first time, I felt sorry for him, because the truth was about to break him. Because the truth was about to break him. I motioned for Mason to sit. He hesitated, glancing between me and Celeste. She hadn't said a word since I showed her the flash drive. Her expression was still, but her hands, trembling just slightly, the way a person trembles when they know the fight is over, and only the consequences remain. "Mason," I said gently, "I need you to listen to something." He looked confused, defensive. Even, "I didn't do anything illegal." "Elena, I know." I cut in. "You didn't." He blinked. "Then why?" I reached for the tablet on the table and played the security footage Leah had pulled. One clip. No sound. Just a silent sequence from 2 weeks ago. Celeste entering the server maintenance room with a keycard, plugging in a USB, typing commands. Mason watched. Then leaned in closer, as if hoping the image would change if he stared hard enough. That can't be her," he said, voice cracking. But it was, and he knew it. Celeste didn't even try to deny it, just crossed her legs, placed her hands calmly in her lap, and said, "I did what I had to do." Mason turned toward her slowly, like someone waking up in the middle of a nightmare and realizing the monster was sleeping next to him. "You told me Elena was stealing," he whispered. "I told you what you needed to believe," she replied coldly. Silence. Dense. Swallowing the air between us. Mason stood abruptly, knocking over a chair. "You used me." His voice cracked open rage, shame, betrayal in a single raw note. "You said I could be great," he said. "That you believed in me?" Celeste looked at him with something like pity, or maybe disgust. "You can be great, but not under her. She would have never handed it to you. I was making room for you." Mason stared at her like he was seeing a stranger for the first time. "I didn't want it like this." He stormed out, didn't look at me, didn't say another word, just vanished down the hallway, like the truth was chasing him. Celeste stood up and adjusted her blazer. "You've won," she said flatly. "No," I replied. "I survived. You just lost." She left without another word, but something in me stayed frozen long after she was gone. See, here's the thing about winning a war. You didn't start. You don't feel triumphant. You just feel heavy, like you've been holding your breath for so long, you forgot what it felt like to breathe. The board voted the next day. Unanimous support for me to continue as CEO. No charges were filed. Celeste struck a private deal. NDA, resignation from all advisory roles, and a quiet retirement with her assets mostly intact. Mason submitted his resignation 2 days later. No confrontation, no grand apology, just a 3-line email and a missing keycard. But the fallout, it never really stops. A few investors wanted to know how it got that far. Some staff quietly questioned my judgment in letting Mason rise so fast. The stain lingered. Even if the ink dried, I moved forward anyway. Project Echo launched to market 2 months later. Immediate traction, high adoption, praise from outlets that once questioned whether I'd lost my edge. But I never felt like celebrating. Instead, I found myself staring at old security footage some nights, not of Celeste, but of Mason. Those first weeks when he was just a curious kid in the office, asking questions with wide eyes and genuine wonder. He had potential. He just never had a chance to grow it without her shadow behind him. One night, I found a letter on my desk. No envelope, no signature, just a few handwritten lines on company stationery. "You deserved better. I'm sorry I let her twist it." I never saw Mason again. I heard he moved to Vancouver, started working with a nonprofit tech initiative for underserved youth. Maybe it was his way of making peace, or maybe it was penance. Either way, I let the past go, at least most of it. But I kept the flash drive, not out of spite, out of memory, because I needed a reminder. Even the ones who smile at you can be carving your name out of your own story. Even the ones who smile at you can be carving your name out of your own story. I kept that flash drive in the back of my desk drawer, tucked behind a stack of unused branded notepads and an old keychain from Arcadia's first product launch. I never opened the file again. I didn't need to. The scars were already written in ink across the company, across me. The press eventually moved on. The board leaned in closer than ever, no longer doubting my authority but now tiptoeing around it. I was no longer the young founder with vision. I was the woman who survived a corporate mutiny led by her own stepmother. And I wore that like armor. For a while, but something unexpected began to happen in the months that followed. I started losing interest, not in the company, not in Arcadia itself, but in the game, the backroom strategies, the positioning, the whisper wars at networking dinners. I'd spent so long in defense mode, so long calculating trust and tracking loyalty, like it was an algorithm, that I forgot how to just enjoy building again. The board wanted expansion. They pushed for IPO timelines. One member even suggested bringing in a co-CEO to balance the brand's voice-subtle code for someone smoother, more camera-ready. Another Mason, just with better media training. I smiled at that suggestion, then declined it. Politely, but every week I stayed. I felt myself drifting farther from the Elena who used to work until 2 a.m. Writing code on diner napkins. The Elena who would have laughed at IPO talk and instead built something cooler just to prove a point. That's when I started quietly meeting with an old college friend, Aubrey. She'd pivoted into private innovation labs, small batch think tanks that funded weird, disruptive ideas no traditional VC would touch. We met twice a week. No press, no pitch decks, just whiteboards and black coffee. She said I looked tired. I told her I was tired of being tired. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to hand Arcadia over to another Mason, but I was going to walk away, on my own terms. 3 months later, I made the announcement. I would step down as CEO, effective end of quarter. I'd stay on as board chair, still guide the heart of the company, but someone else would run the day-to-day. The industry didn't know how to react. Some praised me for knowing when to pass the torch. Others speculated I was hiding a scandal, or maybe preparing a comeback under a new brand. Let them guess. I didn't care. What mattered was that I finally had space, not just physically but mentally. I started sleeping again. Real sleep, not the shallow, twitchy, one eye on your inbox kind. I bought a small cabin 2 hours outside of Seattle. overlooking a still lake with a dock that creaked when you stepped too close to the edge. I brought my old laptop. No email, no Slack, just a blinking cursor and the blank canvas of what could come next. And then, one morning, I received a letter, a real letter, postmarked from Vancouver. Mason. It was longer this time, handwritten in black ink, slightly smudged. He wrote about everything: his guilt, his confusion, his realization that he'd been used not just by Celeste, but by his own desire to matter. He talked about the kids he was working with, how teaching them coding gave him a sense of peace. He never felt chasing power. And then he wrote, "You didn't just survive. You made me see that survival isn't the goal. Becoming someone worth surviving for, that's the real win. Thank you, even if I didn't deserve it." I folded the letter neatly and slid it into the back of my journal. Because even though I'd sworn off the past, sometimes it finds you anyway, and sometimes, just sometimes, it doesn't bring knives. It brings closure. And what of Celeste? Well, she vanished from headlines. Her name no longer floated in investor circles. Some said she moved to the East Coast. Others whispered she was consulting behind the scenes for an offshore firm. But one thing was certain: she was done, at least in my world. Still, every so often, I see a woman at an airport bar with perfect posture, a navy dress, and pearls, and I feel my shoulders tighten just for a second. Old muscle memory, old war wounds. But then I let it go, because I didn't walk away defeated. I walked away free. And somewhere, beneath the silence of legacy and headlines, I left a scar they would never be able to erase, one that whispered, "You should have picked a different target. You should have picked a different target." The phrase echoed in my mind like a quiet anthem, bittersweet, resolute, not because I needed revenge anymore, but because I had become the kind of person no one dared try again, and that was its own kind of peace. I wasn't looking back, at least, not until the call came. 6 months after I stepped down, Leah pinged me while I was sitting on the dock of my cabin, legs dangling over the water, a cup of chamomile tea in hand. "Elena," she said, voice tight, "we've got a problem." I sat upright instantly. "Arcadia?" "Yes. Someone just tried to buy a controlling stake." My stomach clenched. "Who?" A pause. Then, "You're not going to believe this. It wasn't Celeste. It was Miranda. My sister, the one who dropped out of college, gone AWOL for years, and left our family in emotional foreclosure. Apparently, while I was fighting one war, she'd quietly rebuilt herself into a venture capitalist operating under a married name, and now she was using her fund to buy influence in Arcadia quietly, methodically, the way Celeste once did with Mason." My pulse surged. Was this revenge? Ambition? Or just fate's cruel idea of symmetry? "She's already bought 8%, Leah continued, "through 3 shell firms. We only caught it because one of our older compliance monitors cross-referenced patterns from an unrelated audit." I laughed. I actually laughed. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. "Is there a discounted betrayal package going around or something?" Leah didn't laugh. "Elena, if she reaches 15%, she can trigger a shareholder vote." Of course she could. The company charter I'd designed allowed it, because back then, I didn't think I'd need to protect the company from my own bloodline. So there I was again, back at the edge of a cliff I thought I'd already jumped off. Only this time, it wasn't a wicked stepmother. It was the woman who shared my last name, my childhood, my dinner table, and the twist, she'd been watching the whole time. Not from the sidelines, from the shadows. I drove back to the city the next morning, quiet, focused. I didn't tell the board I was coming, just walked through the front doors of Arcadia like I'd never left. The receptionist froze. "Elena," one whispered. I nodded. "Tell Leah I'm here." 15 minutes later, I was in the executive conference room, pulling up every document I could find on Miranda's acquisitions. I tracked her aliases, found a speaking event she'd done under a new name, Miranda Blake, touting silent acquisition as an ethical disruption tactic. Ethical disruption. Cute. She even smiled the same way Celeste used to, lips pressed, just tight enough to look polished. And suddenly, it all clicked. Miranda hadn't disappeared after all. She'd watched me, studied the battlefield, and now that the war was over and the ground still scorched, she was walking in to claim the ruins as her own. But she made one mistake. She forgot I was still alive. I called in every favor I had left. Every private investigator, every forensic analyst, every corporate watchdog I'd once helped. And I made it my mission not just to stop her but to expose her. I compiled her transactions, mapped her corporate spiderweb. Then I did something bold. I called her. No disguise, no threats, just one sentence. Funny thing, Miranda, you disappeared just long enough to think I'd forget who I am. A long silence. Then her voice, cooler than I remembered. You're not the only Cross who can build an empire. Elena, I smirked. Then you should have built your own, not tried to hijack mine. She didn't respond. Didn't have to, because I had already filed the block. By the end of the week, with help from Leah and a few still loyal board members, I initiated a retroactive clause buried deep in Arcadia's bylaws, one I'd insisted on years ago after a sleepless weekend fueled by paranoia and espresso. The clause allowed the board chair to pause hostile acquisitions pending ethical review if the buyer had direct familial conflicts with existing leadership. She fit the definition. Barely. But legally, it was enough. We froze her stake at 8%. Then, I did what she never expected. I offered her a seat at the table. Conditional. Limited influence. No voting rights, but transparency. You want to be part of this story, I said, looking her dead in the eyes across that glass table. Then you play by my rules. She looked at me for a long time, then sat down. Not out of surrender, out of calculation. And that was fine. Let her calculate. Because I wasn't the same girl who'd once begged to be seen. I was the woman who wrote the ending now. And this time, I wasn't writing in pencil. Miranda stayed on technically. Her seat on the advisory board meant she could weigh in, send memos, join roundtables. But her voice was just another among many. And without voting power, she couldn't turn whispers into votes. Not anymore. She wore her restraint like silk, pretending not to mind the limitations. She even sent congratulatory emails after quarterly reports, signed, warmly, M.B. I read them, then deleted them. Let's not pretend we were family again, just because no one's bleeding. Still, it changed me. All of it. The Celesta saga, Mason's betrayal, Miranda's power grab, it stripped something raw in me. And once the adrenaline of survival faded, what was left behind wasn't fear or bitterness. It was clarity. I finally understood why I'd built Arcadia in the first place. It wasn't to prove my parents wrong, or to rise above my sister's shadow, or to win some imaginary race that no one remembered entering. I built it because I had something to say. A way of seeing the world more structured, more efficient, more fair that didn't exist yet. And if I let people like Celeste or Miranda take that vision and twist it into a ladder for their own self-interest, then everything I endured would have meant nothing. So I made one last move. I sold the company, not to the board, not to Miranda, not to some soulless tech giant that would gut it for patents. I sold it to my employees, literally. A structured employee ownership plan, phased over 4 years, with equity dispersed from top to bottom. Everyone from my head of engineering to the night janitor received shares. Ownership for the people who actually built Arcadia. The board was shocked. Miranda was livid. You just gave away your power, she hissed during one of our final calls. No, I said, smiling. I just made sure no one could ever steal it again. The news made headlines. I didn't do interviews, didn't write a memoir. I just walked out of the building quietly one morning in early spring, past the security guards who now owned 2% of the company, past the lobby where Mason once shook hands like he already belonged there, past the boardroom where Celeste tried to stage her quiet coup. I left everything where it belonged, and I started over. I bought a tiny office above a used bookstore in Ballard, rented by the month, one desk, a dusty window, no assistants, no strategy decks, just me, a laptop, and a whiteboard. I started a consultancy small, quiet, just one project at a time, sometimes with tech startups, sometimes with burned-out CEOs who reminded me a little too much of myself. I didn't need to scale it, didn't need to go viral. I just needed to be in control of the why again. And I never stopped writing, not code this time, but essays, letters, sometimes little thoughts on power, resilience, identity. People started reading them, sharing them. A few even called it healing. Go figure. That's the twist, isn't it? I spent half my life defending what I'd built from people who wanted to claim it. And now that I let it go, I finally feel whole. I didn't just win back my company, I won back myself. So if you're listening to this late at night, maybe with earbuds in and the hum of a fan in the background, wondering if you'll ever make it through the betrayal, the disappointment, the cold hands reaching for what's yours, let me tell you, you will. And when you do, don't just rebuild what they tried to steal. Rebuild something better, something quieter, something no one else sees coming. Because sometimes the best revenge is peace.